An ingredient that has become a staple in my kitchen for the last several years, and in my opinion is one of the most versatile things you could add to your culinary arsenal, is kimchi. It might seem difficult to make, but it's actually a pretty simple process. So let's make some kimchi. Exact measurements for everything will be in the description. We're going to start off with one large Napa cabbage. I've already gone ahead and cut this one in half. Now you can absolutely leave it as whole leaves, which is a bit more traditional, or even cut it into quarters, but I usually end up chopping it up before cooking anyway, so I like to slice it up about a half an inch or just over a centimeter thick. That way I still get some texture while keeping it bite-sized. Regardless, don't worry about being precise. To that, we'll add about 2 tablespoons of kosher salt. Don't use table salt as it will affect the final product's taste. It should definitely taste salty, but still be edible. Also, make sure you use a non-reactive container or bowl while you do this, as the salt will give it a metal taste. Now you want to really work the salt into the cabbage, as this will help to draw water from it, while also seasoning it and helping to resist bacteria that would otherwise spoil it. You're going to want to let this set at room temperature for at least an hour or overnight to draw out as much water as possible. Next, we're going to prepare our vegetables. Wash and peel 1 large carrot and cut both of its ends off. While you can do this next part by hand, I highly recommend grabbing yourself a Japanese mandolin. I'll leave a link in the description of where I got mine. They're not very expensive and will give you a much more uniform cut. They're one of the most useful tools you can own, and you can use them to make your own potato chips, and that right there is worth it. But just like with all kitchen tools, be careful with them. Fan out the slices on your cutting board, and using a sharp knife, julienne the carrots. Again, don't stress about being too precise. We're going to do the same to a small Daikon radish, which has a milder and sweeter flavor than your standard red radish. Most grocery stores will carry Daikon nowadays, but if you're unable to get one, you can use red radishes or just omit them altogether. Cut the ends off of a bunch of scallions and remove any wilted or dry looking parts. You can slice these up any way you'd like, or even just cut them into large chunks. I prefer to slice mine thinly on an angle or bias. I also like to use the entire scallion, including the white, as the strong onion flavor will become much more mild as the kimchi ages. Place all of your cut veg into a very large bowl. You're going to need a lot of room to mix everything later, and this will make your life a lot easier. By now, the cabbage will be very soggy and will have formed what is essentially a brine. Squeezing it should release a ton of water. You'll also notice how the texture has changed. It is a lot more flexible, but still has a nice crunchy snap to it. Next, it's time to make the kimchi sauce. Roughly cut up 1 Granny Smith apple. While an Asian pear is much more traditional, I prefer a Granny Smith. It's a lot brighter and cleaner in flavor, and also adds some acidity and sweetness. Plus, they're much easier to find throughout the year. The skin has a ton of flavor, so I don't like to peel mine. Just give them a quick wash. Add the cut up apple chunks to a food processor. You can use a blender for this, but since the sauce will be a bit on the thicker side, it will need to be stopped and stirred a lot more than if you were to use a food processor. Give it a couple quick pulses before blitzing it up thoroughly. This will help make it easier to break down. Give the sides a good scrape with a spoon or spatula, and to that we'll add a knob of ginger about the size of your thumb and 6 or 7 large garlic cloves. Pulse it a few more times to mix. To make kimchi, you will need 3 not-so-common ingredients. The first is fish sauce, or Korean anchovy sauce. Squid brand is probably the most recognizable and readily available amongst them, and can even be purchased at Safeway. It's salty and packs a ton of umami. The second is gochugaru, or Korean red pepper flakes, which are more flavorful than they are spicy. If you can't read Korean, you can just look on the package, as sometimes it'll say for kimchi, or it might even just have a picture of kimchi, as this one does. You'll also want to get a coarse ground gochugaru instead of a fine ground, as it will give the final product a better texture. The third ingredient is shrimp paste. With traditional kimchi, you would use salted shrimp, but this is not as easy to come by as the first two, unless you have access to an Asian grocer. Shrimp paste will last for several months in the fridge and gives the kimchi a slight smokiness as the shrimp has been sautéed. Add the fish sauce, gochugaru, and shrimp paste to your food processor and blend on high until fully incorporated. If you find it's having a hard time mixing, just add a splash of water to help get it going. Once it's all thoroughly mixed together, it'll have a deep red color to it and have the consistency of a paste. Plus, it just smells really good. Now that our sauce is made, we can finally mix everything together. The cabbage by this point will have reduced in size substantially. Using your hands or a colander, squeeze out as much of the water as you possibly can. This step is crucial because if there's too much water left in the cabbage, it will dilute the flavor of the sauce. Add the drained cabbage to your cut vegetables and begin to fold and mix it until everything is distributed evenly throughout. For the last step, I strongly recommend using gloves. The kimchi sauce will stain your hands red, and because it's spicy, if you don't wash your hands enough afterwards, you may get some in your eyes if you touch them. Plus, the sauce has a fairly fishy smell, which is hard to get out. Continue to mix until everything is completely coated with the sauce. All that's left now is to bottle it up. I like using 32-ounce or 950 milliliter mason jars. Using a mason funnel, if you have one or can get one, and if you use mason jars as much as I do, they're worth their weight in gold, will help reduce the amount of mess you'll make and just make it easier to fill. You want to make sure you really pack the kimchi into the jar, eliminating any air pockets that form. I'll often use a chopstick to stab the mixture down and achieve this. The goal is to force the liquid that has formed to the surface so that the vegetables are fully submerged in liquid. This will help the fermentation process and reduce the likelihood of spoilage. Make sure to leave some room at the top of your jar for gases to form and escape. And with that, our kimchi is ready to go. Always label and date any ferments you have. This will help you keep track of the aging process. The first week is always the most important for kimchi, as this is when most of the active fermentation will take place. I like using these silicone fermentation lids to release gas pressure. I'll leave a link in the description for these as well. Give the jar a good shake and release gas at least twice a day for the first week. Otherwise, the gases will build up and may explode. While the kimchi can be eaten right away, it's best after at least a week at room temperature before going into the fridge to help the ferment. In my next video, I'll show you my favorite way to use kimchi. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment if you've made this or have any ideas for future episodes. You can also follow me on Instagram for lots more content.